Countdown? Oh, hello. Hi. Thank you for joining us virtually on the internet. Before we begin, I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, specifically the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, from where our stream host Magenta is situated, the Wodi Wodi people of Darawal land, whose land our guest Pat Grant is streaming from, and the Wongal people whose land I am speaking from today. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I would also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander viewers that we may have today. So, hello, I am Claudia Chinyere Akale. I'm an illustrator, animator, and cartoonist based in Sydney. I live and work on Gadigal and Mongol country, and I'm the 2021 facilitator of Toolkit's graphic narratives. And so graphic narratives come through many names, such as graphic storytelling, graphic novels, or as I simply love to call them, comics. So today's guest is Pat Grant. There's Pat. There's Pat. If you can see Pat.
Hi.
And so Pat Grant is a comics maker, a writer, designer. He's the author of 2 graphic novels, Blue and The Grot. And Blue has won multiple awards and was listed as one of the 10 great graphic novels of 2012 by Laura Miller at Salon. Pat is a lecturer at the School of Design at UTS in Sydney. He's also the co-founder of the Comic Art Workshop, a project development retreat for graphic storytellers, and he is part of a research team developing the new history of Australian comics from 1980 to 2020. He draws his comics the old-fashioned way with inks on watercolor paper, and in his backshed studio by the beach where he currently is today. And so Pat lives in Austinmer with his wife and 2 lovely little boys. So housekeeping today before we begin. Toolkits is a 12-week program for writers aged 30 and under to develop their skills in a unique and exciting online environment. Toolkits is run by Express Media, and Express has been around for over 30 years, developing, supporting, and promoting young writers through workshops that develop skills, through opportunities for constructive feedback and publication, like VoiceWorks, which we'll mention again later, and through awards and programs that recognize excellence. Toolkits is an online program with participants from all over Australia. During April, May, and June this year, we are presenting a live session of broadcasts every week with a focus on fiction, non-fiction, and graphic narratives. That's us. Toolkits is generously supported by the copyright agency Cultural Fund, and this session will be available on YouTube as a resource and will be captioned in the coming days. And lastly, if you would like to ask any questions of me or Pat at any point, you can use the hashtag EMToolkits on Twitter or leave a comment in the YouTube video where this is streaming right now. Oh, okay, so tonight we're going to talk about comics publishing. Comics are an extremely accessible medium that have facilitated independent and underground scenes through self-publishing for quite some time. Simultaneously, in the past few decades, comics have been gaining traction in mainstream Western publication beyond tried and true formats such as weekly strips, political cartoons, and superhero fiction, and expanding into longer form works of fiction and non-fiction across countless genres, duly referred to as the graphic novel. So, how do you publish comics? Can you make a living off of a comic practice? How do you find publishers? How do you gain traction in the budding Australian comic world that is dwarfed by long-established publishing histories in Europe, North America, and East Asia? Why would you subject yourself to the grueling existence of artisthood in the decaying vestiges of late-stage capitalist society? We're here to answer those questions today in discussion with Pat, who's a cartoonist, teacher, artist, and a grubby skateboarding coach. So, yeah. Okay, Pat's here reading a zine.
Oh,
But
sorry.
that's it. I'm done with my blurb.
Paying attention because I was reading this wonderful comic cover that I found by this amazing artist. Isn't it curious that the color of the comic is the same as the color of you and all of your stuff? Also, don't forget, Claudia makes zines as well, so go check her out.
I do.
Claudia makes comic zines. I mean, and really, we're going to talk a lot about zines today.
We are.
So I thought that we could start by I went through my archive to prepare for this, and I selected a bunch of stuff that you can't find on the internet already, and a bunch of stuff that I haven't talked about for years, because it relates to the early part of my life when I was trying to go from somebody who didn't consider themselves to be an artist or a writer to somebody who was ready to commit to like a huge life-changing graphic novel project. So here's what we'll do, Claude. We'll go. I'll show a bunch of stuff, which I'll do a little bit of storytelling, and then I will go back to a black screen, and we'll snap out of screen share mode, and you can ask questions, make provocations, challenge me on untruths, and bring us back to our always back to the theme that we
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can heckle you ruthlessly. Is that
absolutely. I expect it, and I'm prepared.
Okay. Fantastic.
All right. Let's have a go. I'm gonna. Okay. We are sharing window. So, I feel like when we should always start with a little bit of somebody's childhood, just so you can get an idea about what kind of person they were. So I grew up in a place that didn't have artists. It didn't have it wasn't famous for art. There wasn't a community that valued the arts. Instead, what we valued was sports. And so I grew up. I loved sports. I spent all my time in the ocean. I was an artistic person, but that was expressed in things like giving myself a mullet just for fun on September 9th in the year 2000, or maybe giving myself another terrible haircut just for fun, and posing in photos that look like the American Gothic photo. But I was always drawing, and I pulled this one up, which is an interesting
sick
piece from my childhood. I imagine that I was aged 15 when I drew this, so very, very, very interested in sports and a kind of grotesque cartooning. So there's a fascination with ugly men, landscape, coastal landscape, and the breaking wave. And so it's weird that those are the things that I've never been able to escape in my life. So I'll go straight into the section. So basically, because I didn't have any mentors, there was no one in my life. It's like I knew that there were famous artists, and I knew that there was me, like semi-bogans living in coastal towns 8 hours drive from a city, but I didn't know that there was a pathway for me to become an artist. And so I just lost my passion. I stopped drawing, and so I didn't really draw from about age 15 or 16 all the way to about age 20. So I had about 5 years off. And the thing that got me back into drawing was the internet. I started keeping a blog, and my blog was full of bad writing, and it was full of like weird comedy cartoons like this one. And I think it's interesting. Looking at these, it's kind of interesting because it's like, you don't. I didn't really get any better at drawing in between the age 14 or 15 and age 20. So I consider this stuff to be pre me even making the slightest effort to be a good designer or a good draftsperson. It's me just scribbling, really. And this stuff was done in between lectures in my creative writing class. So I had decided, I'd given up drawing, but I decided that I wanted to be a creative writer. So I was keeping this blog these images are so old that they're corrupted. I found them in an archive. They've been bouncing.
They were frying away.
Yeah, yeah, totally. They're going. It's like the internet version of going moldy. So this is kind of what I was doing, and really it was participating in this proto version of the internet that is would be kind of embarrassing for anyone who grew up on today's internet. You know, you would log onto your blog, and there would be 12 hits overnight, and they would be literally the same 12 of your friends who checked your blog every day, and you checked their blog, and you wrote comments, and so it was this micro internet that I learned that I could make people laugh by making these dumb drawings. But what I was also doing while I was making these dumb drawings, these terrible artworks, was I was trying to write short stories. I wanted to be like a famous author. I wanted to tell stories, and so I was studying creative writing, and what I was doing during this period was I was learning how to write. Sorry, my son. Can you hear Bede?
That's Bede. I thought so.
There's two walls in between us. You know, he's not anywhere near. He's just
passionate. He has things to say.
But anyway, I found my visual voice in these things that I was scribbling in between my sketchbooks, and they were I'm just kind of embarrassed about how like juvenile they are now. You know, like it was really like just like rushed things to make my friends like giggle. And I did see myself as participating in this kind of proto webcomics community.
That last panel is something else.
I know. I mean that was and so what was happening was I was kind of mucking around in this incredible low stakes environment. None of my friends were designers. None of my friends were artists. There was no one who would ever go, dude, can you just like get your line weights right? Can you get your lettering? Just sort that stuff out. All my friends were like were literature nerds, and they were like, oh great, I'm reading this heavy literature, and now I can look at Pat's comic and have a laugh. But what I was doing, I was trying to get published as a writer, and I was submitting my work to all these different places, and I'll show you what happened. I submitted several works to VoiceWorks. I don't know if you've heard of VoiceWorks, but it's the publication that is created by Express Media. Oh, wrong way. No, like that. Yeah, Express Media. Yeah, Express Media. Anyway, so this is a place where someone like me could get published at that stage in my career. And so I remember I sent it via mail. I printed 3 short stories. I put it in mail. And I printed a couple of my comics, and I put those in the mail, and I sent it to Express Media, and I got a phone call saying, "Oh, hi Pat, this is Kelly Chandler. I'm the editor of Express Media." A phone call on a landline, and
of course.
And I was like, "Oh, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I've been called by an editor." And she said, "We think your work is amazing, and we want to publish your cartoon." And I was like, what? No, I just threw that in there to like it. Oh. And so and that's actually the story about like the beginning of my career, is like this, you know, realizing that I had this special ability to connect with people via this combination of drawing and writing. And so I'll show you, this is one of the first things I ever had published, was a cartoon. Let me find it. Here it is. And it's that. I scribbled it in a lecture. I did a bunch of Photoshop cloning. It was literally like 12, let's say an hour of my life. And hey guys, you can't come in here, mate, guys, because I'm doing a talk. See, I'm a terrible father as well.
Yeah, that's going to scar them for life. They're going to remember that. So
anyway, I was a bit sad because I was like, but I'm a writer. I'm a writer, and you published my weird comic. And then they just referred to me as Tapass. They didn't know who I was. They referred to me as Tapass in the editorial room. But anyway, anyway, so that's kind of how I went from like I was making art in this little blog community, and then I suddenly exploded, and then I suddenly kind of had access to this like this Australian literary community that was centered around this magazine, VoiceWorks. I'll go back to screen share. Do you want to chime in with questions or heckles, Claude?
Well, I think I've heckled enough, but the main question, or I guess comparison I have, is that the huge difference of what you mentioned in the beginning about having mentors, about there being like a realistic person to point to and being like, oh, whoa, that person's real and they make comics or they make like they publish books, whatever. It's really funny because I remember that moment for me was when I was doing my animation degree, and I went to one of the guest lectures and it was Pat Grant. And I remember because I used to spend all of my teens in the comic section of Kinokuniya, and so I walked past the signed copies of Blue like 100 times, and I'm like, oh, that guy's Australian. Oh, so he was here because he's Australian. And then like a few months later, Pat was given a lecture, and I was like, oh my God, a real human being made that book that I saw in the bookstore. So yeah, I think it's a huge contrast to see how much in strides things have already started shifting, and also how much accessibility university gives and how much accessibility living in the city gives. Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the internet was so rudimentary when I was in high school that it would take, sometimes it would take a minute for an image to load. So so the idea of participating in an online community as a teenager was not a thing, you know. It was tedious for me. So yeah, like and when you do meet that person who you're like, oh, I could see how in 2 years' time I could become like you, and then you'll introduce me to someone who in 3 years' time you'll be like them, you know, and suddenly you can see the stepping stones to becoming that person who has the book in the bookstore. After I went to actually I'll do the screen share again. And so afterwards, I went to a festival that I was studying creative writing, and my teacher sent me to this festival called the National Young Writers Festival, and I was at one of the parties, and it was really late at night, and there were some everyone was getting loose, and I bumped into this group of, like, I perceived them as pixies, and it turned out that it was the editorial team from VoiceWorks magazine, and this is one of the most important moments of my life. They sat me down and they said, "You're Tapas. Oh my God, it's you! You're a human!" And I was in a fairly euphoric state, but it was the first time somebody had noticed me and known my work before they knew me. And they said to me, "Mate, your writing was great. It's just we get heaps of great writing, but we don't get a lot of cartoons like yours." And that was a big thing. So it was a combination of getting in touch with this arts organization, like sending them my work, but then putting myself in a position to bump into them at a writers' festival. Oh my God, I remember that. I'll never forget that night. So, and then the next morning, I woke up with a hangover, and I arrived at the Zine fair, which was
the very next morning.
The very next morning, another completely different revelation, which was like this giant room full of these people who are not published authors or like famous artists. but instead they're practicing artists who create their own opportunities and make their own stuff. And they're producing books in small runs, and it's ephemeral. You know, these little publications are born and die like flies, but everyone wanted to chat, everyone wanted to swap and share, and so I just picked up books and books and books and books, and then I devoured them on the train back to Sydney, and then I immediately started making my first zine, and that so I kind of took a stash like this back home, and I kind of realized that that I could start doing what I was doing on my blog, but just immediately sort of transfer that to like a print format. And that was when I felt, oh, this is what my practice should be, making little printed books. So this was my first book. It's called Stool Shit Comics. It had a piece of street art on the front, like a paste up that I stuck on a toilet block across from my house. I did that thing
Across from your house. That's the like #1 criminal mistake.
I know.
Then we're like, who did this? And look across the street and see you with your amazing.
The guy with the flares and the dreadlock. And I created my own I created my own like comics imprint that I used once. And so making zines was suddenly my thing. And so I loved it. I spent a lot of money on printing things. I packaged them up and I sent them out to people. I got onto zine lists and I went to all the zine events. I sat, at the hub at Newtown and sold zines out of a suitcase. I sat outside the Sydney Writers Festival and sold zines. And then people started responding to me, and I would start meeting people I'd be behind a desk selling zines, and people would be coming up and say, oh, well, I've got this one and I've got this one, but have you got anything new? And I had this sense, oh, wow, there's like a real audience here. And people would send me like weird mail, like this.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, isn't that great? Yeah, and so for me, making zines has been this thing that I discovered like at about age 22, and every time I'm in lost with my practice, I go back to it, and it's a really fulfilling project for me. A business, I don't do business cards. I just make zines, and I pass them to people, and it works really well. So yeah, they just like every time I do a gallery show, I make a little zine to go with it. Every time I do a big project, I might chop it up into smaller bits and make little self-published books out of it. You can screen print the covers. You can do little handmade things. My favorite zine story was a guy in the US who did an edition of 52. He did an edition of 52 zines. And he got a packet of cards and he sent them to Hunter S. Thompson, who's like famous gonzo journalist who loves guns. And he asked Hunter S. Thompson to fire a bullet through the pack of cards. And Hunter S. Thompson fired the bullet through the pack of the cards and sent it back to the zine maker. And then every edition of that 52 edition zine had a card that had been personally shot by Hunter S. Thompson. I love that as a great sort of like high concept piece of small run publishing.
Yeah, that's also very American conceptually.
So I'll go into the next section. But what I really learned from going to the Young Writers Festival, discovering zines, just meeting the editors that were publishing me, was that a big part of the art practice that all these people were doing was building community and participating in community. And so I started to put my work back into the National Young Writers Festival. And every year I would go, and one year I did the artwork, which is this artwork here. But we put on these sort of super lo-fi exhibitions with like $300 budget, and a rented shop that we had for 48 hours. And these are, and I was looking at the photos from this section, and man, it was such a such a hotbed of talent. In the back of all of these photos are all of these amazing people who are famous now, like Martin and Mandy Ord and I can't even reel them off. But yeah, I was looking through the photos here and going, wow, there was some. Sean Tan came to this this thing. So this is an example of a zine that I made. On the right, you can see this big poster. So I made a giant comic poster, and I always like to show people how I'd made my work. And so on the left, you can see the original drawings, and on the right, you can see it assembled and printed as the final poster. Okay. So, you got any questions, Claude? Should we go out or should we keep burning through?
I guess I'll take this as a moment to remind people watching, if you want to ask a question, you can use hashtag #EMToolkits, or you can comment on the video. But yeah, what you were saying earlier about zine dreams, I think that's a pretty universal part of the ease that self-publishing has in, how do you describe it? Like when you hold something printed and you're like, oh, it's a real physical object, and like my art's in a book that you can hold in your hands.
Yeah.
It feels really different to just posting art on the internet or just posting it on a blog. Because I started really similarly, where way before Instagram, and like way before even like just in the beginnings of Facebook being a thing, I had an art blog and I used to do the same thing. And there was always that kind of air of anonymity to it as well, because the internet was so small that most of the people you knew were either just people you knew in your personal life who followed your work, or complete strangers who would happen to stumble upon it, and they would be far and few between. But yeah, that's a really big point I want to make to a lot of people, is that if you are like, you have a lot of ideas, you don't know where to start, you don't know what to make, just make it into a zine. Even if it's just for yourself, like even if you just make one copy and you don't really go anywhere with it, once you have that magical feeling of holding it in your hand, you won't be able to stop. It's very addictive.
Yeah, sometimes I get young artists and they hassle me on Instagram, like this, like, hey, what, like, come and look at my stuff, and I never did that. What I did was I packaged my zines up and mailed them to people, and it seemed to work. It's, and if it didn't work, I didn't know about it.
Ooh, we've got a question from Twitter.
Oh yeah.
What advice can you give to someone who isn't very socially / pretty nervous, but wants to engage with the wider arts community? How / where do you start?
Well, I would start by acknowledging that everybody who makes art is socially nervous, riddled with self-loathing and imposter syndrome, and actually the community, participating in a community is the way you manage that, is the way you kind of like you get yourself past that. So I would say start with like I feel like it's always that thing. For example, a zine fair is always that thing where it's like you show up, or a comics convention, you show up and you're like, oh my God, these people are older than me and they're so talented. And
or the opposite. Oh my God, they're younger than me and they're so talented.
Yeah, well, that's how we feel now. That's obviously. But I mean, the first time you go, you're like, oh, they're so good looking, and that guy's a little bit scary, but I like his comics. And you kind of you have this sense of that it's a hostile place. But that you kind of, as soon as you push past that, and usually all it takes is showing up multiple times, becoming a familiar face, and then suddenly it's the warmest, most supportive community that you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, I think my advice on that end would be, one thing that is kind of ingrained into you from youth. I don't know if it's like an external thing or an internal thing, but comparing yourself to other people and constantly comparing your work to other work is really counterproductive, and something that I just, like a light bulb moment in my late teens, especially when I started doing creative degrees, and then instead of being a really big fish in a small pond, there's hundreds of other people who can do art just as well as you can, and everything that everyone praised you for as a kid doesn't really matter because there are tons of people who can do what you do. One thing that really helped me is realizing that treating other people's successes as a good thing, and like learning to actually admire other people's work without that air of comparison, like just being genuinely happy when you see someone who makes a really cool zine or a print, not getting jealous, just killing jealousy, killing comparison. And I don't know, when I approach every like artistic community kind of event, I'm filled with like genuine joy seeing how my peers have developed or how they've changed or how their practices started flourishing. So if you start to have that kind of genuine approach to other people's work, and it gets a lot easier to visualize that everyone else is thinking that way about you. So you kind of get out of your own head about the comparison thing. Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, I would second that too. And it, I think I feel like one maybe a piece of advice if you're feeling like participating in community is terrifying is just bank on the familiar face rule. Just I think that, you know, particularly the comics community in Australia is tiny. So somebody who shows up to 6 events in a row, like and you know, even if you're not even talking to anybody, you know, like I feel like that's a really great way to get comfortable, and then you'll become part of the fabric of community quite quickly. I don't think you should feel much into any community or any creative sphere and go like, hey everybody, I have arrived, you know, like look at what I have to offer, and you know, and you know, it doesn't really work like that. I think it's a much more subtle kind of slow building network of support.
Indeed.
So what was my next let's go see
what's the next black slide. We've covered community.
Okay. So I wanted to say, but like there was a point where I was like, cool, comics is my thing, and people started going, oh, you're comics Pat, as opposed to design Pat, or as opposed to a crystal meth Pat. So but I was doing all sorts of stuff, and actually, when I think about the way my style has emerged, I learned so much of what I know about making comics from doing street art or painting murals illegally and not illegally. I was heavily influenced by the Melbourne kind of street art movement that was happening around the early 2000s. I really wanted to participate in it, and I even moved to Melbourne expecting to participate in it, but I didn't like staying up late, so I ended up making comics, up early and making comics instead. But also printmaking, making gifts for my friends, participating in like you know, like drawing, just weird projects that aren't comics. Have always been really satisfying relief from making comics, and really helpful in articulating what my personal style is. So this is really indicative of my personal style from that particular period of my life. I was really interested in terrace houses and this kind of like high contrast architecture. And I also like I did stuff with theater. I did like weird art installations. I used to do these sort of I used to run these vacant lot picnics where it would be like a tour of vacant lots in Sydney. And there would be a meal hidden in the grass at each vacant lot. It was like this, and it was a bicycle tour of vacant lots in Sydney. So I was really interested in all this other stuff. But I would always come back to zine making and comics. And I would say most of what I did was like I wasn't a great prolific street artist. I was just a dabbler, really. But that really helped me working with spray paint. Really helped me understand working with ink on paper. I was a terrible performance poet. I was a terrible.
Any videos of that?
No, I think
Can we find any on the internet?
I was terrible at theatre and installation and the fine art stuff, but I had a run at it, and I learned a lot about communication for my zines and my pop culture stuff. Okay, but then I tried other things, and then I went and I really tried to be a pro. I was like, okay, cool, I can do this. Everyone likes my comics. I can write. I'm gonna be a pro cartoonist for a little while. And so I really tried to be strategic about it, and pretty much failed. So this is what I look like at that stage in my life. Weirdly, I look almost older than I do now. But so I moved to Melbourne. I decided I like to sleep. I like to go to bed too early to be a street artist, and I thought the street artist kids were a bit nasty. So I did a lot of band posters, and I tried to get this comic in the street press in Melbourne. So I developed this comic, and I nearly killed myself trying to pitch it to these different street press. I had this idea that if I could get one in each of the street press all over the country, I could be a syndicated cartoonist. And I like the craft of these stories, and when I read them, I think, man, this actually could have been a series, but it just didn't fly. It was like 6 weeks of my life that I threw into it, and it didn't fly, so I just dropped it and went, okay, next thing. And so the next thing was, do anyone read the Cat and Girl comic? No, it's from the first wave of internet comics. Anyway, that was my inspiration.
Honestly, probably have, but I don't know by that name.
I like this as a vehicle for my dialogue writing. Just two characters yammering at each other about whatever, and trying to stuff as many jokes in as you can. Hey, buddy, how you going? You have to come to me later, okay? But so at the time, I was surfing. I was still surfing, still traveling a lot. I decided to have a go at my childhood dream, which was getting published in surfing magazines. And so I just did the same thing. I printed some stuff out. I wrote a story. I put a bunch of drawings, and I sent it to all the magazines. And more than one of them wrote back to me. And the reason they wrote back to me was because I said that I would work for almost nothing, which was true. That was a terrible way to start the relationship. But I don't know if you can see me, but I pitched a comic to Australia's Surfing Life. So that's this one here. Can you see me, Claude?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I pitched a comic to Australia's Surfing Life, and that got. And that was it. That was a sort of long running comic, or not long running. It ran for a couple of years, and then I worked for this magazine called Tracks, and I did illustrations. So I did a single page illustration in Tracks every week. And I was so sad. It was my childhood dream had come true, and I was
and it wasn't living up to what you thought.
So sad. You couldn't believe how sad I was. Because it was such a grind to get this work done, and I got paid so poorly. But man, it really leveled me up. I worked really hard for 2 or 3 years. And meanwhile, I'm doing like other projects I'm doing street art projects. I'm organizing community residencies. I'm like making zines, doing gallery shows, all that kind of stuff that young artists do. And I was trying to meet these deadlines. But it really taught me a lot about print design, teaching and working in storytelling. If you want to see how my process works, this weird Tales from the Surf image, I've got the original on the wall behind me. So that's how big I draw. So that drawing is quite large. That's how big I draw. And I mean, that's something I learned at that stage in my life. I was doing this poster, and it was on a giant piece of paper, and that was a huge breakthrough of like, oh wow, your style becomes totally your own when you draw large. So I tried to be a pro and I failed dismally. But this kind of, and this is kind of one of the last pieces I did. So I kind of, my style is kind of emerging. A new surf magazine asked for something a bit more progressive, and I kind of, this one was published here, and recently I've had another big piece in this surf magazine. So I've always kind of had this kind of relationship with this, but ultimately I felt this pressure to be a little bit sexist, and I felt like the work that I was doing wasn't reflective of my politics. And once the sheen of my childhood dream had worn off, I realized that I wasn't being true to myself. And I decided that what I really wanted to do was use my comic skills to tell a longer story that reflected my actual politics, which are much more vexed and nuanced and much more actually progressive than like a men's sports magazine might present, even though the people working for them were super progressive. So just getting published in a magazine was a huge dream. It was something I had to do, and it really just came. I sent an A3 envelope to every surfing magazine. I was just constantly sending out these big envelopes with artwork.
The postage. A3.
Guys, you should still do it, because what happens is they get an A3 thing on their desk and they're like, what is this thing on my desk? You send the same stuff in an email, they'll just ignore that. But what is this thing? And they pull it open, and then it's like, oh. And then the art director walks in and goes, what's that? What's that on your desk, mate? And then they're having a conversation about your work, and then they see that you're willing to work for
nothing.
Nothing, and they're like, oh, this guy sounds like the sort of person we need. But the media landscape is even more grim than it was back then, and I think both of these magazines have shut down now. So but I don't think the key principles of getting in touch with gatekeepers and decision makers is that different. If it's like an Instagram aggregator or like a design blog or something like that, I think you build it. It's the same principles about beginning with building a relationship. It's not a transaction; it's a relationship, and that's what I kind of learned. All publishing is all about like gently and tactfully beginning relationships and then managing them in a grown-up way. So like things would happen, like I would bite off more than I could chew, spend 3 weeks on a set of illustrations, send them to the surfing magazine, and then they would say, sorry, we're not running them.
Don't like them.
We'll pay you $150, but we're not going to run the work that you've done. And you get that phone call or you get that email, and you feel your stomach dropping. But working through those kind of moments, that's what kind of helps you kind of continue as getting published. And consequently, some of those relationships have grown into deep friendships. Yeah. So
I think the flip side to that, just on that point, is like making connections with the gatekeepers of publishing and like your respective field. But the flip side of that is also just making it yourself.
Right.
And I think that's become kind of more accessible in the, like, as much as I hate the internet, it has helped a lot in being able to market yourself and potentially reach those gatekeepers by just making stuff yourself without needing to go through the traditional means. The art hags I know make a ton of zines, and then Ella and Georgette, the founders, editors-in-chief, just decided to make a magazine. So now we've made Hag Magazine and just run an issue every once in a while. And same thing with Chris Neal, who I know, who just loves comics and was like, I'm just going to curate a bunch of comic anthologies, and did it. So to anyone out there who's like, oh, that's really intimidating, definitely do try to get out of your comfort zone and try what Pat's telling you to do. But also remember that if that fails, you can always try and make enough work to actually create a foundation for yourself.
Yeah, I always think those two things go hand in hand, because it's like, if you're not making your own stuff, if I wasn't making zines and sending them out to my friends and participating in this small like underground community of artists, I wouldn't have had anything to send to the surfing magazines. Like, and if I did, it would have been half baked. If I, so I think gatekeepers, if they get a whiff of someone's got a voice, they've got energy, they've got an audience already, which you can really do now. They're bringing audience to the project or the space that's being gatekept. Then they can smell that momentum, and they're like, oh, I will facilitate. I will facilitate you, and that's what I often see. I try not to think about editors and gatekeepers as like Anna Wintour sort of like tastemaker characters.
Yeah.
I like that, and I do not like that, and I do not like that, but I like that. That's not who they are. Really, they're hungry to find new voices, find new people, and to facilitate the people to grow into like big artists or big authors or something like that. But you can definitely get in trouble if you sit with your hurt feelings too much.
Yeah.
I've made the mistake of writing angry emails and sending them before going to bed, and then waking up the next morning and going, oh,
and being like, oh, I don't care anymore.
Like, I am an artist of integrity, and your publication is shit. And now I'm going to bed, and then you wake up and you're like, oh.
Yeah. So basically, just go to bed with those feelings.
Yeah.
It's a really quick learning curve. If you ever start making work editorially, always, whatever you make and you really like and you send them, they'll be like, oh, actually, how about we do this instead? So just don't get married to your work. Just
and think about it as, I mean, even if it's your friend who's running an anthology zine or curating a show, like, just if you would consider that to be a relationship with some back and forth, some flexibility on both sides. So think about even if it's the Monthly or the New Yorker, that relationship is the same. It needs to be nurtured. It needs a little bit of work. And man, if editors can feel that you're willing to like put work into that relationship, they'll always come back to you. Okay. Next bit.
We're short on time. So
we're running out of time?
Well, we got like 10 minutes left.
All right, I'll
How
burn
far
through
are
them.
we?
Because I do have some. So I wanted to return to the community idea, and this is kind of maybe caps off the relationship side of it. So one of the things I've learned is that the thing that sustains my art practice is participating in communities of all different kinds and creating artwork that facilitates that participation. And every time I go wrong, it's when I'm ignoring the community and just like working alone or trying to transcend the community or trying to do something like that. And so looking back on my life, I had some great moments where I went off and did and went camping or hung out in a residency sort of space with some other artists. And so when I was living in Melbourne, I organized a little camp out with the comic book artists that I knew at that time, and we went outside Melbourne. And it was 2 nights. We made this artwork on this kind of awesome pink grid comic. that sort of shows the different kind of people that were there. And on the right was a residency in inner city Melbourne at NGV. But the real thing that changed my life was this, and this is in the US. So the guy with his arm with the checkered shirt in the middle is Craig Thompson, who's like a big American sort of graphic novelist. And we were sort of Craig's proteges for this 3-week residency in Florida. And that's Sam Alden, and he was another artist I had a deep connection with. And this is T Boy, another artist who I had a really good connection with. And these guys have both gone on to be like really juggernaut artists in their own right.
Yeah.
And so Jake Wyatt here on the right is he's kind of gone off to work in the mainstream comics, Image Comics. Jed McGowan published books, and Matt Taylor on the left here, he's an Australian, and he's producing a TV series that I'm working on now. So it was definitely when I look back at this period, it's like, wow, we didn't know it yet, but this was like this important moment of connection for all these different artists. And so I realized that, like, wow, you got to apply for residencies, apply to go onto trips. There's arts infrastructure that can facilitate these life-changing relationships. But there wasn't anything in Australia for comics. So I did maybe one of the dumbest things I've ever done, and I set up a small arts organization with a friend of mine. We got together, we did it as a team, and we called it Comic Art Workshop, and it's like a 2-week residency for people who are interested in leveling up their practice and making ambitious works of comics. And T, you can see her there in the check shirt. She came from America. This is just before she got crazy famous. But there's a bunch of people in the room. This is our first one we ran, and a bunch of people in the room have gone on to publish overseas, like Chris Gooch and Campbell White. And we did crazy drawing experiments. We went to Indonesia together, and we had a different group of artists. It was really life-changing, incredibly exhausting and challenging and confronting, but beautiful. It was like passing through the fire of storytelling together. And I've made friends that I will never ever I'll be close to forever. I'm certain. And so if you can get to any kind of artist residency out in the country, overseas, any of the Australia Council residencies, anything like Comic Art Workshop, my God, you should do it. It'll change your life. And those relationships are not just there to nourish you. They're not just there to nourish your practice, but they are also part of the professional sphere that gives your career momentum.
And they become part of the foundation of Australian comics community, because
right.
we're so small that, yeah, the second piece of really bad advice, as you were saying, don't do it, is make it yourself.
Yeah, totally. Running an arts organization it can be the enemy of making your own art. But this is one of the things I'm most proud of that I've done in my life, and I feel like contributing like projects like this. It's like the rising tide lifts all boats. Somebody's talent isn't there in isolation. Instead, it kind of cross-pollinates with everyone else's talent, and that is the stuff of literary movements. That's how we that's how we kind of create a comics canon in Australia, or like a tradition of Australian storytelling. Okay, I'll get to the end. And there was a point in my life when I was like, okay, I'm hitting my late 20s. This is me at about that stage. I'm finally ready to commit to a big book project. And so I started working on my first graphic novel, which is called Blue. You can see some of the artwork in the background there. That's kind of what my original artwork looks like. Big drawings with brush and ink. And I knew I was ready because I made this zine. I've got a copy of it right here. And when I put this zine out into the world, everybody who made comics was like, dude, what the fuck happened to you? Your art just got amazing. Or, like, gosh, it sounds like I'm really tooting my own horn, but I guess what they said is your art just got really better. How did that happen? And it happened. I don't know what happened, but something clicked together. My lettering started to look good. My everything feel right. And so suddenly I was like, okay, it's time to work on a big book. So I applied for an arts grant. I got a grant. I got some money from a university, and I spent 2 years making this graphic novel. And I met someone at a zine fair who I gave this note to, and a copy of the manuscript. She was a young American lady. She said, "Hey, I'm going home. I'm going to a convention in the US. Can I take anything for you?" And I said, "Here, have a manuscript and have this handwritten letter." And I gave it to, and they gave it to some publishers over there. She just handed it to them. So someone I met at a zine fair gave me my big break, and one of those publishers wrote to me and said, "Hey, let's publish this book," and that's what happened. And that book changed my life. And that was where after that book came out, which is here. I never felt I never had. I feel like I achieved my dream of being an author, and then I had to sort of come up with some new dreams, and so got the reward for all that hard work was going to the States and conventioning at tables and feeling like I was part of a global comics tradition, not just the Australian comics tradition. And again, we went to the States with a group of artists who from the Australian comics community who I met from participating in that world. That's us. Michael Hawkins.
So zine fairs, people. It all starts with the zine fairs.
That's it. And then what happened was America. I was like, I looked at my beloved, and she looked at me. She was like, "Hey," and I was like, "Hey." She was like, "Hey." And I was like, "Hey," and so we got married, and then we went home and bought a house, and then
is that how it always happens for everyone?
Yeah. Well, we bought 1/5 of a house, as you see, because we were broke, and we still couldn't afford it at that point. But and that was when my life as an adult started, and there's a whole another bunch of stories to tell then. But I wanted to take you guys from the journey of like being a young artist, going from not knowing what you're doing, not feeling like you could call yourself an artist or a writer, to feeling like you can look someone in the eye and go, "Yeah, I'm an author. I made this thing. You should read it."
Yeah. We've only got 2 minutes left. So we did have one question that we missed a bit earlier, which was, you talk about doing street art and murals and other things that it's inspired your art. How do you, or how did you, deal with feeling kind of burnt out by making your other hobbies about the work / the art?
I don't know. I burnout's the problem in my life now, but back then I was just relentless. I was just so hungry, always just like, oh, new thing. And I loved learning. I've kind of realized that I'm happiest when I'm learning, and so new hobbies were always like, oh, cool, I'm learning how to use spray paint, or I'm learning how to make paste ups or screen prints or relief prints. And then you'd always learn something that you could take back to your comics. I wasn't strategic about it then. That was just the effect.
Yeah, and passion tends to sustain you like for an abnormal amount of time. Like when you're really excited about what you're doing and you're young and you have all this time and all the work's new and you're learning all this stuff, you're really like G'd about it, which is kind of where I'm at now. But I can honestly already foresee, like, I'm like, I got like 3 months of this left in me and I can't do 5 things at once anymore.
Yeah. I think I'm ready to go back to learning. I think I want to spend some time just going back to the foundations of my art making and try and learn. I think I want to learn anatomy. I've been doing some life drawing lately. So I think that's how I sustain my passion, is by
always remember
to learn.
I'll always remember the week of the Grot launch when you had that the show with all the original art, and then like I think I saw you the week after, and you were like, "Man, after all these years, I still don't know how to draw a hand."
Hey, I did my first good hand. I did my first good hand at life drawing on like yesterday.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's what it.
seriously, first good hand. I did it.
It's
I
all
haven't
coming
got
together,
any.
folks.
I know. Yeah, I still can't draw a hand. Still just like it's a bundle of sausages. That's my style.
And mine are just wiggly, fingerless things. So no one has to learn how to draw hands. That's what I'm going to end this on.
If you want to read this book, you can find it on the internet. If you want to read this sad zine that'll break your heart, you can also find it on the internet. And also, you should read Claude's zines. Are they on the internet? They are, aren't they?
A lot of comics are on the internet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a little read comics tab on my website now.
Yeah. Go read some comics.
Go read some comics.
And make some comics and published.
And make some comics and go to zine fairs. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. Tormino, which is very sad. I organically encountered that in the wild on Tumblr with like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of notes or whatever, everyone being like, man, my heart, oh, this is beautiful. And I was just like, yeah, no, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the most read thing I've ever done, and it's just the saddest story. But yeah, isn't that wild? That one,
real life connects with a lot of people.
That one came out just before the internet went bad. Before like that was like the last thing I ever did that was like content that could go viral just because it was good and not because of like because I think the Facebook algorithm came in like
it was like before the concept of viral was really a thing.
Yeah.
But yes, anyway, sorry, we're over time, so we have to
over time. Yeah,
we have to wrap up.
I love you guys. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for coming, Pat. Thank you everyone who submitted any questions and leaving comments. Thanks for people who said hi in the chat. So I just want to give a quick reminder that this session will be available on YouTube as a resource, and it will be captioned in the coming days. So it isn't at the moment, but it will be. And our next Toolkits Live will be on Tuesday, 1st of June, 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with our non-fiction facilitator, Stephen Pham, and he'll be joined by Cher Tan for the next Toolkits Live, which is on structure and form. And you can tune in on Express Media via this YouTube channel. So yes, thank you everyone for joining us.
Shout out to Express Media.
Shout out to Express Media for single-handedly propping up Pat Grant's career, and for letting us be here and talk about comics.
Yeah, good. Bye.
Bye, guys.